Okay, cool. So let's jump into it. So today, essentially, what I'm going to do is I want to talk about how we're going to create a couple of applications using the MERN stack. And to kind of give us a reminder of the MERN stack, and I'm going to go ahead and draw some drawings while I do this, is the MERN stack stands for MongoDB, Express, React, and Node.js. And in order for you to be able to build applications with this stack, you're going to have some prior knowledge, some prior information. So, for example, if you're going to work with MongoDB, Express, React, and Node, you definitely have to have a basic understanding of the JavaScript programming language. So you're going to need to know JavaScript. In order to be effective with React, you're going to need to also understand HTML, right? And CSS. You're also going to have a basic understanding of the client server model. So you'll need to understand clients, right? And servers. So you will need to be able to understand that. And if you've got those basic foundations, you have JavaScript, HTML and CSS, and client and servers down, then you will be able to then learn the technologies needed in order to build things with MongoDB, Express, React, and Node.js. So without further ado, I'm going to assume that if you are continuing with this video, you feel confident that you know your basic JavaScript, your basic HTML and CSS, your basic understanding of clients and servers. So what we're going to do is we are going to take that for granted, and we're going to focus on these four technologies and learn how they work, so this way that we can build some applications. The applications that we're going to build a to-do list, right? So we will do that. To-do list is one of everybody's favorite applications to try to build with the MERN stack and just in general. We're also going to build a simple bookmark application, right? So we will take a look at that, right? We are also then going to take a look at building an application called the MERN Cafe, which is going to let us use what we learn in to-do lists and bookmarks in order to build a larger application that makes use of more advanced features of MongoDB, Express, React, and Node, right? So that is going to be our goal. Now, each one of these, we're going to pretty much build them the exact same way. You're going to see a lot of overlapping concepts between these three different projects, but overall, the things that we hit on with all three of these are going to give us the opportunity to really truly understand how the MERN stack works. So for those of you that are not familiar with me, have never seen anything from me before, I've been a coding bootcamp instructor since about I don't even remember when, about 4 or 5 years as of the recording of this video. I've also been the CTO at a venture-backed startup, one of the few Black-owned startups to ever raise 7 figures in venture capital. On top of that, I've worked at Blavity, another venture-backed Black-owned startup. I worked there as a senior software engineer and did a lot of projects for them, ranging from working on their projects to also doing some ad work for places like the Shade Room and Hollywood Unlocked, Baller Alert, etc. I've worked at a crypto company back in the day, pre-COVID, so way back in the day, on trying to create a barter management system. I'm using the technology that I'm going to be showing you today. And then also, I have done freelance work for a lot of different companies, a lot of small businesses, a lot of barber shops, hair salons, et cetera, et cetera. I've done pretty much everything you can do when it comes to doing stuff, for the web. And I've been very fortunate, very blessed to have the opportunity to make that my career. I started coding back in 2003, and fast forward, it's about to be 2023. So it's been a long time, and I'm just trying to share some of that knowledge with whoever has this video in their hands. Also, my teaching style, for those of you that don't know it, is called EDIPS, EDIPS. And so what I try to do with this style is try to hit all different learning styles. So for example, the E stands for explanation, right? And so that means that I'm going to try to explain things to you so that you'd be able to get some knowledge from what I'm talking about and then also be able to look it up. Demonstration, I'm going to show you how things work. Imitation, where you're actually going to code along with me. So I do something, you do something. Practice, where I give you the opportunity to go out and try some things on your own. And sharing, which is the opportunity for you to share your work with me and others, to receive feedback and also get used to talking about the code that you write. Now, of course, in this format, there's going to be a lot more D and I here, demonstration and imitation, being that this is an asynchronous video. But I will give you some things that you can practice. I will give you ways for you to share. And I am going to explain some things, not as much as I would do in an in-person or a live online class, but I am going to explain things as I go through it as well. But I'm going to be really heavy on demonstration and imitation right now. And if you need any additional resources from me, etc., feel free to reach out to me. You can always email me at boss@bigpapacode.io. Again, that's boss@bigpapacode.io. All right, so without further ado, let's jump into it. So in order to kind of get us going in the right direction, what I'm going to quickly do is I'm going to go ahead and let me open up this document. Give me a second to find it. There we go. And I'll have it on the screen in a second. And here we go. So we take a look at this document that I want to share. I want to review some things about React itself. And essentially, I want to talk about the main components of React, which is going to be like the linchpin of this whole entire MERN stack. It's going to be the part that really is really the driving engine behind making everything within the MERN stack work. So without a core understanding of React, you really can't add MongoDB, Express, and Node together with it. So to get started, we'll talk about React components and the virtual DOM, which are the main pieces of React that make it work. And by the time I finish this like brief explanation, you should understand what component-driven development is. You should understand what declarative programming is. You should also understand the virtual DOM and its purpose, how to use React dev tools, etc. Right? So getting started, let's talk about separation of concerns. So In a traditional sense, separation concerns in web development is probably something you've heard of previously. But basically, what it means is breaking down a web application into distinct parts that handles a separate concern, such as the user interface, business logic, data access, etc. Now, traditionally, front end development is separated into HTML for the structure, right? CSS for the presentation, and JS for the functionality. That is traditionally how that is broken down. So when we talk about separation of concerns, like we said in the traditional way, we're talking about that HTML, which creates the structure of the website. CSS, which is the style or appearance. That's when you go ahead and you put all the drip on, you know what I'm saying? You go ahead and you throw on your Louis Vuitton and your Balenciaga and your, all that fancy stuff. You go ahead and put all that onto the body and make things look good. And then JavaScript, which handles the dynamic action. And we normally separate concerns on the front end where HTML goes in one location, CSS goes another location, and JavaScript goes another location, which is great and definitely was better for the old way we used to do things on the web. But React creates a brand new paradigm where instead of separating things into concerns of this is where I put the structure, this is where I put the styling, this is where I put the JavaScript, instead we separate things by this is where I put the button information. And here's where I put the header information. And here's where I put the footer information. You separate concerns by the actual UI component itself, right? In one location, and that is how we get component-driven development. So with that said, in React applications, we separate concerns this way, right? Like we talked about a button, a date picker, modal, list item, media. We create these components, and each component has a blending of all this stuff together. So all of the JavaScripts, all the functionality for the button goes with the button. All of the styling for the button goes with the button. And all of the structure for the button goes in the button as well. And what this also lets us do, it lets us create reusable things that we can use over and over and over again. So for example, if I had to put the same button in 10 different locations, if I did that with just this structure, I would just have to write 10 copies of the button inside of HTML, right? In order for me to have 10 buttons on the screen. But instead, what I can do is I can just make one component with all of the functionality, all of the CSS, all of the JS in one place, and I can tell my application use the button I made here, use the button I made in this other place, use the button I made in another place. So it makes things more reusable, more scalable, more functional, etc. And that's component-driven development, separating concerns. So essentially, component-driven development is this new approach where we make use of those reusable components to create user interface, right? The actual location where users actually interact with the application. It's based on the React JavaScript library, and it's used to create interactive websites, mobile applications, etc. Right? And then we also have declarative programming, which we make use of in React as well. And now, component-driven development, right, is all about being able to make these things reusable and changing the way we separate concerns. Instead of separating concerns in these big things like this, we're separating them into small individual units like this. Right. And one other great way of thinking about separating concerns and component-driven development is you could look at this as like having a marketing department, right? Having a HR department and then having a business department, right? They all stay completely separate from each other, where this is more in a more agile Scrum approach where you have individual teams. You have a team for, let's say, the website, right? And then all of the marketing people that have to deal with the website, and all of the coding people that have to deal with the website, all of the business people that have to deal with the website, they all work together on one team. That's kind of a small individual company, right? Within the company, and they are self-sufficient. And then there might be another team for back end systems, and there might be sales and stuff like that associated with that as well. Might be another team for platforms, might be another team for whatever. All right. But you have these different teams, and within the teams, you have people that have different roles. Or even to give you like a video game kind of example, you have some games where you have all of the um, all of the or let's even just say sports. Let's say you have football. When you have football, you have offense and you have defense, right? That's like separation of concerns. You put all the offensive players play together, all the defensive players play together, all the special teams players play together. But in basketball, your defensive players and your more offensive focused players, etc., are all on the court at the same time, and you have to play, both sides of the ball all the time. That's a different way of things working. And soccer is kind of similar to that as well, where everybody that has these different functions, they work together in one small unified team, as opposed to just breaking them down into big gigantic departments, right? One by one. And there's benefits to both. But I believe, and so do a lot of modern developers believe, that the second approach with component-driven development is better. And that's why you have all these front-end frameworks all use this same concept. So declarative programming is a programming style that we use in React. It's not only for React, but it's a programming style that we use in React, where we describe the logic of a program rather than describing the exact steps the program should take in order to reach a certain outcome, right? And so the way that you can kind of think about this is, instead of micromanaging the task, where, like, let's say you have a manager and they might tell you to do these 7, 8, 9, 10 steps in a row in order for you to get to the end goal. Whereas another manager will just tell you, this is what I need done. This is by the time I need it done. I don't care how you get it done. Just make sure you get this done, right? And then how you get to the end goal, it doesn't matter. Now, when you write declarative code, that's essentially what you're doing. You're writing your code and telling the application, this is what I want done, and then the application, the computer, make sure that happens. So in React, we achieve this by using components, properties, and state in order to make that happen. So we're going to see examples of that as we build, and then we have the virtual DOM. And the virtual DOM is a core concept of React. And essentially what happens with the virtual DOM is, the virtual DOM is a small, lightweight representation of the real DOM. And making transactions in the real DOM is actually really, 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 really expensive, in the sense of it takes a lot of resources to make that happen. So instead, what we do is we create a lightweight virtual DOM. React does this on its own. You don't have to do it. And essentially, anytime there's a data change, React will make that change in the virtual DOM. And then what will happen is, React will then look at the virtual DOM and look at the real DOM. And it will say, based on this data change that happened in the virtual DOM, does this data change warrant a change in the real DOM? And if the answer is yes, it will make a change to the real DOM, but only the exact part of the DOM that needs to be updated in order to for it to match the virtual DOM, and no more than that. And that is very, very, very important. So that gives us a lot of boosts in functionality that we'll see. But that is the purpose of the virtual DOM, right? In order to make that happen. And then the React developer tools, which I'm going to recommend that you install, right? essentially you could just go to the Chrome Web Store, search for React Developer Tools. The extension should appear in your search results, and then just click Add to Chrome and add that to your results. So it's as simple as is if you go to, let's say, Chrome Web Store, right? And we go ahead and we click here. And then we can go ahead and do a quick search. And we could say, hey, I want the React Developer Tools. It should pop up here in the search results. I'm gonna go ahead and click on that. Right. You want to make sure you're using the official version that's made by Meta, right? The new name for Facebook. Last update for this version was December 7, 2022. And once you go ahead and install this, see, for me, I'd have to remove it from my browser because I already have it. But you'll see a button here that says add to Chrome. Go ahead and add that. And then after you do that, you're gonna have to quit your browser. So you're gonna have to go ahead and completely close out your browser and then restart it. And then in your developer tools, right, when you open them up, you're going to end up with new tabs. Down here at the bottom, it's going to say components and profiler, right? But you're only going to see that when you're on a website that is actually made with React. So when you're on a website, you'll see components and profiler. That'll let you know, hey, I'm on a website that works with React. And like, for example, an example of that is if we go to the ToDoList application that we're going to make, if I go ahead and open this up and I take a look, you see I see components and profiler down here at the bottom. Profile is not going to be something you use too often, right? But you could use this in order to kind of see how data is being profiled, et cetera. And you can click here for more information. But the one that you're really going to use is going to be the components tab. And what the components tab is going to do is it's going to let you essentially look at the component structure of the React application while you're building it. So you will see, okay, well, boom, I have this is the props that I have. This is the state that I have. Things of that nature. Like, for example, inside the state right now, there are 3 to-dos inside of here. And as I do stuff to them, you see now there's only 2 items in the top state, right? Which is for the to-do items. But then below it, there's 1 item in the completed list, right? And so we're going to take a look at how you could use it to take a look at how your data is being passed around, how your component structure, make sure things are named correctly, et cetera. You'll be able to do all of that using your React developer tools. So once you have those React developer tools installed, next thing that we're going to do is we want to just quickly go through the pieces of React that make it as helpful and useful as it is. And one of the primary things that you're going to use every single day is you're going to use component state, right? So you're going to use components and you're going to use component state. So in order for us to kind of get a handle on that, we're going to go ahead and write some of our first code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to codesandbox.io. If you don't have a Code Sandbox account, you can easily create one at codesandbox.io. It's very, very simple to do so. And then what I'm going to do from there is I am going to create a brand new application from a template. So I'm gonna hit the create button, and then I'm gonna choose the React template that is made by Code Sandbox. I'm gonna go ahead and click on it. Right, it should give me a public folder, SRC folder. You see I have app.js and index.js here. It's using React scripts version 4. There is a new version, version 5. It seems to be a little unstable when I have been working with it. So for right now, I'm going to use version 4.0. So that's on purpose. And then you see we have React and React DOM at version 18, which is compatible with version 4 of React scripts. So that's going to be the basic setup that we have. Now, inside this this application, I'm going to start with this code block here. And what we're going to do is we are going to use the use state hook, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to build a simple counter application, right? So we're going to start with that. And that simple counter application is going to show us how to use components with React. So to get started, what I'm going to do for my first step is I'm going to import the use state hook, right? And the use state hook essentially is just a hook that allows us to generate special types of variables, right? And those special types of variables that we generate are going to be reactive. And so when I go to when I create a variable using the use state hook, the variable that I make as a result is going to be reactive, meaning that if it changes, it's going to cause our React application to re-render itself, right? Which is going to cause that differential algorithm that we talked about previously, a little bit earlier, where we're going to check and see if there's a change in the virtual DOM, and if that change happens in the virtual DOM, right? We're going to check and see, does that change mean something needs to change in the real DOM? If it doesn't, we don't do anything in the real DOM. But if it does, then we make a change in the real DOM. And that's not us making that change. React is doing that automatically for us underneath the hood. So we'll see how simple it is to make all that happen with our declarative programming. So I'm going to import use state, just like we stated here. So we'll import use state, and we're going to import that from React. So we're going to import use state from React. And then after we import use state from React, then we're going to go ahead and we're going to use the use state hook to make a reactive variable. And we're going to make one called a counter. Now, by default, what you're going to want to do is whenever you make a variable using the use state hook, right? What you're going to actually do is you're going to name it based on what it is that you want it to do, want it to represent. So that's why we're going to call a counter. It's going to represent a counter, right? And then on top of that, what we're going to do is we are going to also create this setter function, which is going to allow us to set the value of the counter. Now, with state variables, when we create a state variable, you're not allowed to ever change it directly. You can only change it, right, by using the setter. If you don't change it with the setter, the variable will React will not track that change, and your application will not function properly, and you could actually break your application. So the name convention that we always use is state and set state. So the state variable will essentially name it like we have counter here, and then the set state function will name set counter. So counter and set counter in order to match that convention. So let's go ahead and make that happen. So let's finish this up. And then I'm going to go into the body of my application, and I'm going to say const, a pair of square brackets, and then counter, and then set counter, right? Which is equal to useState. And we're going to start the value at 0. And let me go ahead and do a word wrap here. View word wrap. So we say const counter and set counter is going to come from useState. So useState is going to give us 2 variables that we get back. And those, and like I said, the first variable is going to be the actual state variable. It has to be in this order. And the second variable is going to be the setter for that state variable. Right? Then after we do that, then what we're going to do is we are going to create a simple function called add1. And what add1 is going to do is it's going to allow us to be able to use that set counter function to add 1 to the counter every single time that it is invoked. So every time the add1 function runs, it's going to add 1 to the counter. And as you can see, what I'm doing here is I'm writing set counter, and then in the parentheses, I'm going to call to the set counter function, and then I'm going to pass counter plus 1, which essentially means whatever counter is plus 1 is going to be the argument that we pass to set counter. So this isn't us actually changing counter, right? This is just doing a mathematical operation. But what we're going to end up doing is set counter is going to take that value and add it, right, to counter. And not add it, but actually replace counter with this new value. So for example, if the number was 0 and we run add1, it'll say 0 plus 1 is what set counter does. And so set counter will then replace the previous counter value with the new one that we passed in. So the other thing that we're going to do is inside of our code, I'm going to get rid of this right here, and I'm going to put my counter here. And this might be new syntax to some of you, right, that have never seen JSX before. But essentially what we're doing down here at the bottom with this component is assuming you understand HTML, you know what an H1 is, etc. And React components all return this HTML-like syntax called JSX. So it's always going to return JSX. And essentially, if you ever inside your HTML need to embed some JavaScript functionality, you can put any JavaScript expression within curly braces, and then it will show up on the screen. Like, for example, you see this says counter, and you look up here at the top, you see 0. The reason why you see 0 is because counter currently is the value of 0. And if I was to put some other expression here, like counter, something like that, right? And then I save it. And then what I'll do also is I'll make my button. And I'll show you what happens when I do that. Right? For the button, I'm going to say click me to add 1. And then I'm going to say for the functionality, I'll say on click, and I'll say that's equal to the add to add 1 as well. Because essentially what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say that whenever this button gets clicked, I want you to call the add1 function. And if I go ahead and start clicking it, you see it's going 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, 49, because what this double star means is this is a exponent. This means take counter and then do it to the second power, right? And every time I click, I add 1. So instead of this being 64, which is 8 squared, this will become 81, and then 100, right? Then 121, 144, then 169, then what? 196. Ooh, my math is nice. 196, 225, 225, right? And then 256. Yep, 256. 289, 289. Then the next one is after 17, 18. Is that 324? Yeah, it is. And then 381, I think, for 19. That doesn't sound right. 19 times 19, what is that? 361. Yep, 361. And then 400. Yeah, whatever. I don't need to impress you with my math. But at the end of the day, you can see that's what's happening. And that's because whatever is within these parentheses, you can put any JavaScript expression in here, and then whatever the result of it will end up becoming the text that's going to show up within the H1, right? And you can put this anywhere. This is also a JavaScript expression. This is a reference to this particular function. So I'm saying that on click is going to be equal to that function here, right? And so every time I click, it calls that function. I'm gonna get rid of this I'm gonna get rid of that real quick. You see it switches back to 21, but you see the counter is just counting up, counting up, counting up, counting up, counting up, counting up. Right? So pretty cool. What we have there. And that is as simple as it gets within React. But what I want you to keep in mind, all that complicated stuff I talked about a moment ago, all that just happened. So essentially what's going on is I have created this component, right? This component is being rendered onto the page. Where that's happening is if I go to index.js, you can see if you know anything about DOM manipulation, you can see I'm saying document.getElement by ID root, right? That I'm storing that inside this thing called root element. And then I'm using this create root function in order to create a root for my application, right? From that div with the ID of root. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to render my app component onto the page, right? I'll render this app component onto the page by basically injecting it into this root location. And if I look at the HTML file, right, you can see that there is a div with the ID of root within it, right? So I'm injecting my app component directly in there. So in this location, what's essentially happening is I'm taking this an H1, a button, all this stuff like that. I'm packaging it up, but I'm also packaging it up with the corresponding JavaScript functionality. And that's what's getting put directly inside of the inside the browser. Now, the other piece that's actually very interesting that you might notice is the fact that with this application, whenever I click on this button, there's an automatic change here. And for anybody that's done DOM manipulation before, you'd expect to see a lot more JavaScript in order to make that happen. But in this declarative programming style, all we're doing is saying, hey, I want to create a reactive variable called counter. I want a function to update it, right? And I'm going to start the counter from 0. I'm going to make this function, and I'm going to say this function is going to be created in order to add 1 anytime the function is called. And I want to call that function whenever the button here gets clicked, right? So that's what you're saying there. And then you're also saying that I want the counter variable to be the text that shows up here inside the H1. And you don't care how React does this underneath the hood because it has to do steps in order to make that happen. But you're just telling React, this is what I want the end goal of of my application to function. So make it work like this. And so every single time you click on the button, right, and it goes ahead and runs this set counter and adds 1 to it, it's updating this variable, right, that has connections to the virtual DOM, and it is then doing that differential algorithm and verifying whether or not it needs to change something inside the real DOM. And every time we click the button, it does, right? Because then we are adding a number, so we're changing the text, and it just changes just this part and nothing else. No need for a refresh of the page, etc. All that ends up being unnecessary. The only thing that we need to do is we just need to update this one little part of the page, and it updates that one little part of the page and does it in a way that's way more efficient than we would do it by default, right? We could do it just as efficient if we wrote a whole bunch of code, but they're going to take care of making sure that that's the case underneath the hood. And all we have to do is just tell it, this is what I want. And we don't need to micromanage how that process works underneath the hood. So set counter is passed the current value plus 1. React then compares this new value to the old value of the counter. If they are the same, right, React is going to do nothing, right? And you got to beware of references as values. We'll come back to that. But essentially, remember, objects and arrays are reference types. So you got to make sure you give it a brand new object every single time that you want to, if you're going to if you're messing with an object or an array. So you can't just like push an item into the array. You've got to like replace the array with a new array. So keep that in mind. And it's very simple to do. Very simple syntax in order to make that happen. We'll see that with our to-do list, but you just got to make sure that you do that. Now, if they are the same, React does nothing. But if they are different, then React updates its virtual DOM based on a re-render of the component and its children. It then compares the virtual DOM to the real browser DOM and only updates the places in which they differ. So if there's a difference, then it makes a change there in order to, keep the virtual DOM and the real DOM equivalent to each other. So it's really, really cool, that process underneath the hood. But again, all that happened just from this little bit of code because it's happening underneath the hood and we don't have to understand the concept of how it works. Just like, for example, for me to turn my car on, I don't need to understand how a combustion engine works. I know that I take the key, I put it in ignition, I go boom, 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 and the car starts up, right? I also know that if the car needs oil, I go ahead and I drain the oil and put oil in. I don't need to know what the car does with the oil and how the oil helps it function. I just need to know the surface level and take care of those more higher level kind of things. So this process that we have, this is why variables that are state are reactive, meaning the DOM will update when those values update. All other variables inside of React are not reactive and they're not going to trigger updates when they're changed. Right? So like we said before, if the state is an object or array, you have to make sure you pass a new array or object, not just modify the old one, because objects and arrays are reference types. And again, this is me assuming that you understand reference types in JavaScript. If not, I have a separate video on the basics of JavaScript that you could take a look at. But keep that in mind that you have to always pass it a brand new array or a brand new object, right? So for example, if we had an array as the state and we said state bracket 0 is equal to 6 and then set state, there's not going to be any update because even though you added a new item or changed the value in the array, you didn't change the array itself. So the way that you could look at this is, let's say, for example, if you have a refrigerator and I go ahead and go to the store, I go buy some bottles of water and I put the bottles of water in the refrigerator. Yes, I put new stuff in the refrigerator, but I didn't make a new refrigerator. It's the same refrigerator that was always there. So React doesn't care about that. Also, if these two variables are both pointing to the same position in memory, for example, updated state and state, if I just say updated state equals state, Essentially, all I'm doing is giving this state a nickname, right? I'm not actually making anything new. So also this won't trigger an update. What I would have to do instead is I'd have to create a unique copy of the array. And the way that we do that is we use these square brackets to make a new array, and then we copy all the values. And the way you could think about this is going to the store, buying a brand new refrigerator, bringing it home, emptying out everything that was in the old refrigerator, putting it in the new refrigerator, and then also buying some new water and putting that new water inside the fridge also. That will trigger an update because we changed the refrigerator itself. So every single time you want to make a change in React and you're in your state, and your state is an array or an object, what you have to do is you have to, right, give it a brand new array or object if you're using arrays and objects, etc., as your state. And this only comes into play when your state is an array or an object. So then we also have the use effect hook, right? So the use effect hook essentially works like this. Let's say if we wanted to console.log just something random inside of our application, right? So if we wanted to do that, right, you don't want to just put that directly inside the React component like that, because React components need to stay pure. And so essentially what we need to do is we need to make it so that we need to essentially make it so that this console.log is going to happen inside the use effect hook, right? And anything that is a side effect, right, that isn't just pure input output, right? Like basically I give you something and you give me back something. If anything beyond that, it needs to be compartmentalized into the use effect hook for it not to mess with React. So in this second example, what we're going to do is we are going to make a second piece of state called even counter. We're going to display even counter on the screen, but an even counter is only going to update whenever the counter itself, right, is a multiple of 2. If it's not a multiple of 2, and that's what counter mod 2 triple equals 0 is for. So if it's not a multiple of 2, then set even counter is not going to work, and even counter is not going to increase, right? So that's what we want to have happen. So we're going to go ahead and add the use effect hook as something else that we're going to import. So we'll import that here at the top. And then we're also going to make that second state variable called even counter. And set even counter, right, for the setter, using that same convention we talked about previously. And we're going to start that from 0 as well. So it's going to start from 0. And then we're going to use the use effect hook. And I'm going to write console.log. And I'm going to console.log. I'm and just a random console log, right? And there's the second argument, because the first argument is that function. The second argument is going to be an array, and it's going to have an array of everything that I want to listen for changes to in order for this functionality to run. So essentially what we're saying is every single time even counter changes, Then that's when I want to run, I want to console.log, right? Would even be better, as a matter of fact, even that's not what it says here. I'm going to go ahead and just say, let's show me even counter every single time. Or show me counter and the even counter every single time. Right? So every single time even counter changes, show me counter and even counter in the console. Now, on top of that, what I also want to do is I'm going to then update the add one function so that when, so that if we take counter and we check and see if it's divisible by 0, then even counter is going to get incremented also. So we'll go ahead and say if counter mod 2 triple equals 0. So if we divide it by 2 and we get no remainder, then set even counter, right, to be even counter plus 1, right? And this is not going to be an else. We still want the regular counter to increment every single time. But I'm only going to do this if the counter is divisible by 2. And then we'll show the even counter on the page as well, just like we're showing the other counter. Right? And then every time we click the button, that's what we're going to expect that every other time the even counter is going to increment. So if I click first time, they both increment. The second time, only one increments. Then they both, then only one, 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 then they both, then only one. I'm sorry. Disregard that. I'm gonna delete that from the recording. But at the end of the day, look, I feel like the way that rap songs are nowadays, I could turn that into something. Deadpool was feeling it though. See my boy Deadpool getting it. He was liking that song. But that is the basics of what's changing add one. But what about this console log we talked about? If we open it up, we could see 0, 0, 1, 1, 3, 2, 5, 3, 7, 4, 9, 5, 11, 6, 13, 7, 15, 8, etc., etc., etc. Right? So we're seeing every single time, right? What was the result after we incremented it? Like for example, if we do it now, we get 17.9. You see they both incremented that time. But this next time, only the top one's going to increment, so it'll be 18.9, but we won't get a console log for that. But now you see they're aligned, 18 and 9. So now, right now, they are both 18 is divisible by 2. So if I run it right now, it's going to check and say 18 mod 2 triple equals 0, which is correct. So then it's going to increment even counter by 1. This is going to go up to 10. And then this is then going to update itself by 1. And then I'll end up with 10 and 19. And there we go, 1910, right? And remember why the 19 is coming first is because remember, counter is first in the console log. And also it's first in the browser as well. Other thing that I want to mention about use effect is the use effect is always going to run when the page first loads as well. So you got to be careful with that. When the page first tries to load, the use effect is going to run guaranteed. Then every time it runs after that, it's only going to run whenever this variable here changes, right? And there we go. Cool, cool, cool. So another thing that you might do with a use effect, right, is you'll probably use it for an API call. That's one of the most frequent things it's used for. So essentially what will end up happening inside the use effect is you would tell the use effect to run to go ahead and fetch some data from some outside source. For example, you could tell it to go ahead and get some data from the API of Google. Go ahead and get something from the Twitter API. Go get something from the JService API. Get something from one of these outside sources that's not inside my own application. And this is critical because this concept here of using use effect to go ahead and fetch data from an API or backend service is the only reason why the MERN stack can actually function. And we'll see that a little bit later. But that is how we are going to do that. So hopefully that was a good refresher. If you already knew about React, and if not, hopefully that lets you know a little bit about how the use state hook within React works. But now we're going to move into building our to-do list. So what we're going to do is go ahead and kind of think about what we have to do in order to build a to-do list. And this might seem very trivial. You might say, oh, when would I need to build a to-do list? Well, if you are going up for a job, right, one of the frequent interview questions that interviewers like to ask, the generic basic kind of one, is going to be you creating a to-do list for them or some slight variation of a to-do list. And the reason for that is because all applications that you're going to build require you to use some form of CRUD capability. Maybe not full CRUD capability, but some CRUD features. And for those of you that need a refresher on what CRUD is, CRUD stands for create, read, update, and destroy. So essentially what you end up doing in a to-do list application is you would create new to-do items. You'd be able to read those to-do items, so you're able to see them on the page. You'll be able to update to-dos, right, that have been created. So to-dos that already existed, you'll be able to change them, i.e., for example, updating a to-do from being incomplete to being complete, right? And then also deleting to-dos and actually removing them off the page and making them no longer exist, right? This is basic functionality that all web applications need at least some part of in order for their applications to work. And creating a to-do list proves that you know how to do all of these things, because this is 90% of your job as a developer doing CRUD, and another 10 to 15, 20% might be authentication and authorization, right? Where we actually say, hey, you are the logged in user, and so you have access to this material, or you are an admin user, so you're allowed to do this operation, right? So CRUD and authentication and authorization build is basically most of what you have to do outside of things like styling and database management and things like that. When it comes to building web applications that users use, this is what users need to be able to do. They need to be able to create, right, data. They need to be able to see the data. They need to be able to update data, and they need to be able to delete data. Even if you're doing something that seems completely unrelated to this, like say, for example, playing Super Mario Brothers. Well, you have your little Mario object, and you can see Mario probably would start with like a zero, with like zero coins or whatever, right? So Mario starts with 0 coins. When you go ahead and you hit that first thing, also Mario starts with 0 points too. Zero that and 0 points, right? 0 coins, 0 points. Mario goes ahead, hits that first thing, and he gets a coin. Now we have to update the data from 0 to 1, right? Mario jumps on the first Goomba. Now we got to change that 0 points to 100 points, right? And so on and so forth, right? So we're updating that data. You're also reading the data because you can see the data on the screen, right? And then also when you started the game, you created a new entry and started playing the game. You created some data, right? So you can see you're already doing CRUD operations there. So your ability to be able to make a to-do list is going to really show the whoever is interviewing you that you have the basic skills needed to be able to build web applications. So that's the reason why we're going to start with a to-do list. So the exercise that we're going to do is going to provide a step-by-step instruction for creating a simple React to-do list using the basic React hooks. So we're going to basically cover setting up the initial project, right? So we'll talk about how we're going to do that. We're also going to talk about how we're going to create the React components, how we're going to style them, and how we're going to use React hooks to store and manipulate the data. And by the end, you'll have a fully functioning React to-do list. So in order for us to set up our project, right, what we're going to need to start to do is we are going to need to use Create React App in order to build this application. And then we're going to create a to-do component, right? That's going to be for creating a single to-do item, right? Then we are going to create a to-do list that we can use to loop over them. Then we're going to use our React hooks in order to store and manipulate the data. We're going to also make event handlers to handle user interactions, like our add one. That was an event handler for whenever the user clicked on the button. We're going to add new to-dos, filter to-dos, add persistence with the database, right? And I'm going to add delete functionality. We're going to add some styling, and we're also going to test and debug and make sure everything is working, right? So that's what we're going to get done. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close all this stuff out. And what we're going to get started and do is we are going to find a safe place on our computer to do a project. I'm going to do mine in this folder that I have created called software classwork, right? And then I'm just going to go ahead and run the create React app command to make a new React application. So I'm going to run npx create React app, and I'm going to call it to-dos YouTube example. And so that's the command that I am running, npx create React app to-dos YouTube example. And it might take a little bit of time for that to happen. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording while that finishes. Okay, now that that has finished, what we're going to do now is I'm going to CD into that folder. And then I'm going to open it up in my VS Code editor. And then what I'm going to do from here is I'm going to start building the React application. Now, this is going to be a full stack React application. So it's going to also need MongoDB and Express as well. So I'm going to add those because create React app only gives us React. So, and that's a big portion. And so I'm going to go ahead myself and I'm going to run npm I express to add Express, right? I'm going to add Mongoose in order to add Mongoose. I'm going to add dotenv, right? In order to add Mongo, in order to add the ability to be able to add things to my process.env by using a .env file. And then lastly, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I am going to make sure that I have, like, some of the other smaller things that I might need as well. So for example, with Express and Mongoose, I have access to MongoDB and Express by using those. But like, for example, I like to use this application called Morgan, right? And that application called Morgan is going to give me the ability to be able to run a logger. And so essentially that logger is going to be able to show me whenever I'm getting an incoming HTTP request, which is going to help us debug. So that's going to be something that I'm going to want. Another thing that I'm going to add as well is I'm going to actually add a serve favicon package as well. And that serve favicon package is just going to give me the ability to be able to serve my favicon icon, which essentially is nothing serious. It's just that little icon that shows up whenever you go to a website and you look in the address bar and you see like a little picture there. So it's nothing crazy that we really need to have, but it just gives us a little bit of niceness with our application. So I'm going to add that as well. So I'm going to add, so npmi express, mongoose.env, Morgan, and serve favicon, right? SERVE dash favicon. That's all one, that all should be one word. So make sure that you don't do that separately. This line is being cut off here, but that's all one word. There's no spaces there. Serve dash favicon. So you're going to run npm space I, which stands for install, space express, one package, space mongoose, another package, space .env, another package, space Morgan, another one, then space serve favicon, two words separated by a dash, right? But one package, so one a whole piece here. So not serve and favicon, serve dash favicon, right? Then I will run that. We'll pause the recording while that. All right, now all of those are complete. So now we can start building our application. So I'm going to start by creating the structure of my application. So there's going to be some folders I'm going to need to make this MERN stack application. So I'll start by making those folders. So I'll say make dir. And I'm going to need a folder for my routes. So I'll call that routes. I'm going to need one for my controllers, right? I'm also going to need one for my models, right? I'm going to need one for my configuration files. And so I'm going to need a routes folder, a controllers folder, a models folder, and a config folder. I'm going to need all of those folders in order for me to build my application. So routes, controllers, models, config, right? So we'll add that. And then after adding that, then I'm going to go ahead and add a couple of files that I'm going to need to start off with. And so I'm going to need to touch .env, .env dash example, right? That I'm going to use to keep showing you what the .env is supposed to look like. The .env is going to contain secret files, so I'm not going to be able to share my secret file with you, but I can show you an example of what it's supposed to look like. Then after doing that, we're going to need to also have a server.js. So we'll add that as well. So we'll have .env, .env-example, and server.js, and we'll run that. And so we'll have all those files. Then what I want you to do is I want you to go to gitignore. I want you to scroll down to where you see .env.local, .env.development local, .env.test local, .env.production local. You see all these different types of .env files. And what I want you to do is I want you to add just plain old .env, just like that, and then save it. Right? That's what I want you to do there. Make sure that you add that so that it will also ignore the .env file. So make that change. And then once we do that, then it's over to the good old server.js. Now, assuming that you already know the basics of MongoDB and Express, this should be very, very simple for you. But I am going to talk through it a little bit just to kind of remind you about some things. So when we make the server, we're always going to start with the back end before we get to the front end. And in order for us to set up our server, which is where everything is going to start from, we need to understand all the pieces to it. And I'm going to go ahead and just write server.js at the top of the file, right? To remind me that's the file that I'm in. And I need to go ahead and I need to require .env, right? .config at the very, very top of my file. And I'm just going to write a note here. The reason why I'm doing that is because this lets me take the, actually let's do a multi-line comment. And we'll just put it right here. And we'll say this lets me take the values from my .env file and inject them into process.env. My .env should have a Mongo URI, which will come from my MongoDB cloud provider. Right? So that's the reason why we're doing this, because this is going to give us access to process.env. Right? And the next thing we have to do is we need to connect our database. So I'm going to assume that you already have a Mongo, like a cloud provider you're getting your MongoDB access from, or you might just have MongoDB installed already on your local machine. Now, I recommend a cloud provider. It's going to be faster, better, all that good stuff. And the one that I recommend is going to be MongoDB Atlas. And you can sign up for MongoDB Atlas really, really quickly just by going to cloud.mongodb.com and then creating an account with your Google or GitHub. And you could just go ahead and immediately use that and sign up and create a MongoDB Atlas account. You can also do this in DigitalOcean. You could do it on AWS. You could put your MongoDB credentials in a lot of different places. But then you just need that link that MongoDB will give you in order to connect your application. So for example, if I log in right now with my credentials that I use to create this account, and my little test account that I have, right? I have 2 different MongoDB clusters already created and set up, right? I'm not going to make a new one because every one I make, you know, I pay for. You only get one free one and then one paid, and then I have the other one is paid, right? So if I come here and I click the button that says connect, right? And I say I want to choose a connection method. I say I want to connect my application. It's going to give you a string that you're going to use in order to connect your MongoDB Atlas account. You see this part here, it says username and password. This is where you would put the username that you created right, for your MongoDB Atlas application, and the password that you created for it as well. And you're going to put that here. You're going to get rid of these carets, though, by the way. You see those carets there? Those carets do not belong there. So do not leave those in there, right? So for example, if your username was Superman and your password was so super cool, you would add username here of Superman, no carets around it. So these angle brackets here, these greater than less than signs, you don't include that. And you do the same thing here for the password. In between the colon and the @ sign, right? Everything you see highlighted right there should be replaced with your password. Everything you see highlighted right here should be replaced with your username. And this is going to be the URI that you use, right, in order to connect to your application. Next thing is that's all you need. Once you do that, MongoDB Atlas will take care of everything else. All you need to do is connect to it using Mongoose, and you'll be fine from there. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this. I'm going to close, and I'm going to open back up my application. I'm going to go to my .env example because I'm not going to update my real .env in front of you. And I'm going to write Mongo underscore URI just like that is equal to, and I'm going to put my string here. I'm going to leave username and password, right, empty. But I was going to sneeze, and I ended up not sneezing. So we're just going to put username and your password here like that. And this link here is going to be unique to your instance. So don't copy mine. Make sure you copy it from your application. This is going to be the link to connect to your MongoDB instance. And then right here after the slash, before the question mark, you're going to write the name of the database that you want to make. And so for me, I'm going to call this to do YouTube, right? To do YouTube. That's what I'll do there. And then I will save that, right? And that's what's going to be in our .env example, right? So that's it for that. And then we need to connect our database. And so preemptively, before I make the file, I'm just going to write require, and I'm going to say that I'm going to require ./config, right, /database. And ./config/database, that is that's going to be where we put all of our database code at, right? And I'm going to say running this will connect our database to our MERN app. So that's what we'll do there. And then we'll save it. And so now we need to actually go ahead and make that happen. We need to make that database file. So I'm going to, in my terminal, I'm going to cd over to config. And I'm going to touch a file called database.js. And then I'm going to cd back out of that folder. And if I look inside my file explorer, I should see a database.js file inside the config folder. I'm going to click on that file, and inside that file, I'm going to add in my code to connect to my database, which essentially is I need to first get Mongoose inside this file. So I'm going to say const mongoose is equal to require Mongoose. Remember, that's why we added that. Then we're going to say Mongoose dot connect. And we're going to say process dot env, right, dot mongo underscore URI. To tell it to connect. Then I'm going to say const db is equal to mongoose dot connection. And then I'm going to say db dot on. So when we are connected, so on connected. So whenever we connect, then I want to run this callback function that just says console.log, where I am connected. And I'm going to say connected to db dot name just like that. Then we're going to save it. And so now we have our database connection. Right? So we'll be able to use that to connect our application now. And as a matter of fact, let me also add the host as well. So we know that we're connected to the right location. So we'll say we're connected to whatever the name of our database is at wherever our database is located. Right? And then we'll save that. And so that's it there. And then let's go back to the server.js. Right? So we taken care of that. And now we also want to take care of setting up our Express application. So I'll say const express is equal to require express, right, to bring in express. And then we'll say const app is equal to express, and then invoke the express function. And what this is going to do is going to create an application object that we can use to build our API that will connect to our React app and build our actually that's enough information. Create application act that will allow us to build our API that will connect to our React application, right? That's what we need to do that for. And then we'll add const path, which is equal to require path, which is a free Node.js package that comes with Node.js out of the box, right? We'll say const favicon is going to be equal to require that serve favicon that we brought in. We'll say that our logger is going to be equal to, remember that logger package called Morgan that we brought in as well. We'll add that. And we'll say const port is equal to process.env.port or 3001. And essentially what that means is when we push it to production, it will use the port that the cloud provider that we deploy it to gives us, or we will use port 3001 if we hadn't be running this locally, if there's no port listed inside the process.env. And where we deploy this to will take care of this piece. So that's it there. And then we'll set up some middleware that we need in order to make our application run. So most important middleware that you should never forget is express.json. We need that middleware in order for us to be able to parse the body of and receive JSON responses and store it inside of rec.body so we can use it in our application. So that middleware is important for that to happen super early on. We need to also add a little bit of helper middleware that I always like to use. Not a requirement, but something I like to use myself to organize my applications. And this middleware that we're going to write here is literally just going to say res.locals, right? .data is equal to an empty object. And then next. And the reason why I do that is because I don't like to put things directly on locals because you end up sometimes overriding things you don't mean to. So I make a separate object called data inside of local, set it to an empty object, and then anything that I want to store, I could just store inside of that object. But the only way that's going to work is if that object already exists. So let's make sure that object exists for me. I'm also going to use app.use, the logger, right? That Morgan logger that we have. And we're going to run it in dev mode. We're going to also say app.use, that favicon middleware that we had. And we're going to tell it to use path.join, right? And the reason why we're using path is just so that no matter what type of computer you might be using right now, whether it's a Linux, a Mac, or a Windows, path.join will put the slashes in the correct direction for your particular application. So I'm going to use the dir name property, which is going to take the directory name, the directory location really, of wherever I currently happen to be located at. And the reason why that's important is when I'm on my computer, I might be in a folder called To-Do's YouTube example. But then when I deploy this to the internet, the folder might be named something else or whatever. And I don't want to hard code in the folder name. So I'm just going to say dir name, and that'll just, that will be a holding place for whatever folder this code ends up running on. And then if you happen to copy this code onto your own machine, you also may not call it the same name that I called it on mine. It may not be in the same folder that I put mine in, but this will make it work no matter where it's located on a computer. Then I'm going to say that there's going to be a build folder. We'll see what that is in a second. That's where all of our production React code is going to be. And that's where we're going to get the favicon.ico from, right? Then I'm going to say app.use. And I'm going to say that I want to express.static, that same build folder, which essentially means that any file in the build folder, I'm going to make accessible on the internet for somebody to go ahead and type in style.css. If that happens to be in the build folder, somebody can go to wherever I deploy this, superman.com/style.css. So just anything in the build folder, I'm going to allow people to access on the internet. But I'm not going to allow people to access, for example, my database file that's in the config folder. They can type in /config/database all they want, but I'm not making that available for people to actually view on the internet, so nobody can reach that file. But any file in the build folder, right, that's going to be what I allow people to see, right? So I'm going to just do that. And so any file in the build folder, people will be able to access on the internet. So everything in the build should be stuff that we're okay with people seeing online. right? And this is only going to happen once I deploy it. Obviously, nobody will be able to read anything in the build folder or any folder while it's on my computer. But once I deploy it to the internet, I want people to only be able to view what's in the build folder, nowhere else. They can't view those files that aren't in the build folder, right? Then I'm going to create a another piece of middleware that we haven't added yet. And that is going to be the routes for my application. So I'm going to go ahead and say /API /todos. And I'm going to list that at require. And I'm going to require that at ./routes /API /todos. Right? Then I'm going to have a catch-all that basically is going to say that if you try to do anything above and it didn't work out for you, then by default, I'm just going to go ahead and send you the index.html file. And the reason why I'm going to do that is because that's the file that's going to have the JavaScript connected for my React application. So if you end up going to something.com, superman.com / Mr. Mixes Spicklick or whatever, just something random that doesn't happen to exist, I'm just going to send you back to the home page essentially, to let React figure out where you were supposed to be. And then we can write code inside of our React to deal with that. But that's not going to be the concern of my backend. And then I'm going to say that I'm going to listen on the port. And I'm going to write that we're going to console.log whenever we're connected correctly. I'm going to console.log. I am listening on port we in the building. And there goes our server.js. So you've already taken care of, right? Our database. We've taken care of our .env. You should have updated your .env with what's in your .env.example, right? But actually put your username and your password in here and put it in your .env file, right? So you should have taken care of doing that. And then in your server.js, you should have connected it. You should have set up your database here, set up your Express application, added everything that you need. And the only piece that's not going to work right now is going to be these routes because we haven't built the routes yet. But in order to build the routes, we're going to need to also build a couple other things. We're going to need to have a model, right? That could connect to the controller, and the controllers are connected to the routes. So whenever somebody makes a request, the routing is going to tell it which controller to go to. The controller is going to be connected to the model, and the controller is going to respond back with the necessary data, right? So we need to make our model and our controller and our route, right? in that order: model first, controller second, routes last. That's what we need. That's what we need to do in order to make our application work. We're also going to need to make updates to our package.json. So we're going to do that coming up soon as well. And our package.json needs to be changed just in order to account for the fact that we're going to need to run two applications to make our to do everything running. Because right here, we're going to be running a backend application and a front-end application. So you're going to need to get that going also. So without further ado, let's make that happen. So I'm going to go to my models folder, and I'm going to quickly set up a to-dos model. So I'm going to cd into models, and I'm going to touch to do singular.js, right? So we'll start there. I'm going to go to do, and I'm also going to cd out of the models folder. And then I'm going to quickly go ahead and make my to-do model. So I'll say const, I need to get model and schema, right, from Mongoose. And then I'm going to say const to do schema. And I'm going to say that's equal to a brand new schema that says that every single to-do is going to have a title. And that title is going to be a string. As a matter of fact, we'll make it required. Right, so we're going to go ahead and tell it that it's going that essentially that the string is going to be required for you to add, right? So the type is going to be string, and whether or not it's required is going to be true, right? So in order to make it to do, you have to give it a title. We also are going to set completed, and we are going to set that equal to required. And that's going to be true. And the type, which is going to be string. Right? Then we're also going to add this object here. It's going to have some options. And the only option that we're going to care about right now is going to be the timestamps option. And we're going to set timestamps to true. And then we're going to say const to do and make our to do model. So we're going to say model. And then we're going to use that to do schema. So we're going to say the name of the models to do, and the schema is going to be to do schema. And then we're going to module.exports and export that to do model. So now the models are done. Then we're going to go to the controllers. I'm going to add a new folder inside of controllers. And so I'm going to cd into controllers. I'm going to make a directory, right, called API. Then I'm going to cd into API, and I'm going to touch the file that we are going to call to-dos plural.js. inside of controllers /API. I'm going to open that file up. And inside that folder, I'm just going to literally up here, just say that I have controllers /API /todos. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to require the model that I just made. So I'm going to say const todo is going to be equal to require models /todo. And then I'm going to go ahead and make my action controller. So the only things that we need is we're going to need to be able to create to-dos. We're going to need to be able to read to-dos. We're going to need to be able to update to-dos. And we're going to need to be able to destroy to-dos. Right? So for the first one, we're going to need a create function. So I'm going to go ahead and make a function called, I think let's do it this way. Actually, let's not break it down. Let's just keep it all inside the global space, actually. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and make a function. And I'm just going to use the traditional function syntax. And I'm going to call this function create. And I'm going to export above here at the top. Just so I think it looks more organized this way. It's just a personal thing. I'm going to say create, read, update, destroy. And I'm going to say async function create. And actually break read down into index and show. And I'll talk about that in a second. Both of those both fall underneath read. So you can look at them as sub things underneath read. Even though we probably don't need the show right now for the application we're going to make. But just for posterity, I'm going to go ahead and make it so you know how to use it at a different time. So you may not actually use it. Then all we're going to do with this function is we're going to go ahead and drop a try catch in there. And we're going to say that our to-do is going to be equal to awaiting for the user to create, waiting for the to-do to create using the rec.body. And then we're going to say console.log, the to-do. And then we're going to set res.locals .data .to-do equal to the to-do. If we get an error, we will res .status 400 for bad requests, and then send back a JSON response, right? And we'll send back a JSON response that essentially says, message error.message. Right? This way that we can see that error message. And now we're done with creating. Right? Very, very simple code there. Now for index, we'll make an async function called index. Right? We'll say rec, res, and next. We'll throw some curly braces here. We'll do a try catch. And I'll say const to do plural is equal to await to do dot find and we'll leave that curly brace empty because we're just going to find every to do. That's what we're doing currently here. Actually, to make it easier on us, let's actually make two separate index functions. Let's say index complete and index not complete. Right? So make two different ones. And we'll do that on purpose because what I'll do is I'll do to do.find on index complete. And then essentially we'll say to do.find and we'll say complete, completed, and we'll say completed true. And then we'll set res.locals data, right? Dot to dos plural is equal to the to dos that we found. And we also got to make sure we call next here. And we got to make sure we call next here too. And if we get an error, we'll say that was a bad request, JSON, boom, message, and then we'll say error.message. Right? Because essentially we're saying that if we got an error, send me back the error message so that we can know what the problem was. So we're going to find all to dos where it's already complete. I'm going to do the same thing here, except I'm going to do the opposite for the second index function. I'm going to say index not complete. And everything here is going to work exactly the same, except complete is going to be false. And everything's going to stay the same. Same thing for the show. It's also going to work the same, except for one slight difference is the show is going to try to find one and it's going to find it by the rec.params.id. So we're going to have to give it an ID. And we're going to use that ID to look up an individual to do inside the database by its ID. And then I'll put that on individual to do. And voila, now we have our create done, our index complete done, our index not complete, and our show done. Now it's just update and destroy. Update and destroy are not very different. As a matter of fact, I'm actually going to copy the show in both of those locations because we're doing essentially the same thing. So in update, what we're going to do is we're going to find by ID and update. We're going to use the rec.params.id to look it up, right? Then we're going to use the rec.body that we would have received from the user, just like when we created. But this is, instead of having a brand new set of data to make a new to-do, we're just going to update one that exists. So we'll use that rec.body to update it, right? So rec.params, rec.body, and then also we're going to tell it that what I wanted to return to me is the new updated to-do. Because if you don't put that, it gives you back the to-do before it was updated. And that updated to-do just caught a bug that I would have got later. Make sure we catch that. So that to-do that we get back, we're going to store it in res.locals, call next, and then res.status 400.json. We're going to send back an error if we get an error message. And voila, now we have our update functionality. Now our destroy functionality is going to work the same way. We'll say destroy, and we'll say find by ID and delete. We'll find it by the rec.params.id, done and done. So find it by that ID and delete it. So find it by this ID and delete it. Call next, and voila, done. And so now we have all of our functionality. And let's not forget to change that name to update. And so now we have our create function done, our index complete, our index not complete, our show, our update, and our destroy. And now it's time to create our router. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to CD, and I'm still happy to be inside the controllers API. So I'm going to CD out of those. You can always check where you are by typing PWD. Don't forget that. Then I'm going to CD into routers, right? I mean routes. I said routers. Or CD into routes. And then inside of routes, I'm going to make a directory, right? And I'm going to call that directory API. Then I'm going to CD in the API, and I'm going to touch todos.js, plural. And so now inside my routes folder, there should be a todos.js. Inside todos.js in route/API, I'm going to make my routes. And essentially, they're going to go pretty simply. I'm going to say that I want to take const express, right? I want to set that equal to require. And I want to say I want to require express. And I'm going to say const router is going to be equal to express dot router. And I'm going to say const. And I'm going to say const. Let's say to do. Let's say CTRL for controller is equal to require. And we're going to go ahead and require // controllers /API /todos. And I'm going to save that. Right. And then we're going to go ahead and build our routes. And so we're going to be able to add all of our controller actions in there. So if we go back to our controllers, we go back to todos.js in the controllers.js, so make sure you're following that. We have a todos.js inside of routes/API and another todos.js inside of controllers API. I'm going to go back to the controllers file, right? You see that we have the action. What is this up here at the top? delete that. That's something that probably not even on your computer. I must have auto completed something by accident, not noticed it. But inside this application, you'll see we have create, we have index complete, index not complete, show, update, and destroy, right? From our React app, for our controller. And what we also need to do is we also need to export two additional things, because right now all we're doing is we're just sending this to res.locals. We're never responding to the user unless we get an error. And we could just say, let's say JSON to dos and JSON to do. And this isn't any special name for this. This is just what I chose to name it right here. Essentially, this is just going to allow us to display all the to-dos or display one to-do, which is always what we're doing. Either we have one to-do or we have more than one to-do. Either have one to-do or more than one to-do. That's all we ever have to display, right, to the user. So I will just go ahead and say JSON to-dos and JSON to do. And we always have to do one or the other. You also see people say index to dos or just index, etc. But we're not going to call it index and show because we've already called our controller actions index and show, and that would be confusing in here unless we put it in its own object or something like that, which we could also do. The key is that we need to get this functionality here. So that's what's universal, is that functionality. And I need to make a function to deal with that. So I'll just say that I need a function. And I'm going to go ahead and call it JSON to do. And I'm going to say that it needs rec and res, right? And then all it's going to do is going to call res.json. And it's going to JSON res.locals dot to do, right? And I'm going to say function JSON to dos. Let's say rec res.json res.locals dot to dos. Cool. Then I'm gonna go back to my routes. Let's build the routes. So first route that we're gonna need is we're gonna need an index route, and we'll need two of them. And so we're going to have one index route for /API / to-dos. Then I'm going to have another index route for /API / to-dos, like so. And I'm going to add to it completed like that, right? Then we're going to need a show, right? Or let's do it in order. Let's say delete, and we'll say API / to-dos, right? And then an ID. So we'll need that. We're also going to need an update, which would be /API / to-dos, also ID. Then we're going to need create. slash API, whoops, slash to-dos, and no ID, because it doesn't exist yet. And then we're going to need show, which is going to be slash API, slash to-dos, and then the ID. Now, the first one is just going to be a plain router.get, right? And the first thing it's going to do, it's going to call the to-do controller, right? And it's going to call the index not complete, because that is the default to-dos, the ones that haven't been completed yet. And then we're going to call the to-do controller dot show all those to-dos, so JSON the to-dos. Then we're going to do a router dot get, and this order of these matters, right? And we're going to say slash completed to show all the completed to-dos. And to do that, we're going to use to-do dot controller dot index complete, and then we're going to do to-do controller dot JSON to-dos, right? Because essentially the first one is to show all the default to-dos, and this one is to show all the completed to-dos. So we have two separate API calls that we can make there to get those two separate lists. So next one that we'll make is a delete. So here we just got to do the same thing. We'll just do a router, but this time we won't do a .get. We'll do a .delete, right? And essentially here we're just going to say that we're going to go ahead and say slash colon ID. And then we'll go ahead and run the destroy method that we made before, which is to do controller, right? Dot destroy. And then remember, we only have really destroyed one, so we're only going to do to-do controller dot JSON one individual to do. And then update's going to look very similar. As a matter of fact, everything after here is going to look almost exactly the same. I'm going to go ahead and go do update and show. Now for update, it's going to be a put request. And then that is going to be update. And JSON to do is correct. For this one, this is going to be a get request, right? Because we're going to get one individual to do. We'll change that to show. JSON to do is correct. And then I will, for this one, I'll do a router dot post, right? This is just going to be a plain slash. This is going to be to do controller dot create. And then we're going to use JSON to do. Just like that. And then now we have all of our routes. And now we just need to module dot exports is equal to that router that we made, and then save it. So now we have all of our routes. We have all of our to-dos, all of our controllers. We have our model. And now we're pretty much ready to go with the back end. Now we just have to test it to make sure that it's working. So we're going to do that. But first, before we can test it, we're going to need to make some changes to our package.json in order for us to be able to take our next steps. So let's go over to the package.json. So I'll click my package.json. I'm gonna scroll down to this scripts tag. And before I make any changes, I want you to understand why I'm gonna make the changes that I'm gonna make. So first thing is, if you take a look, by default, remember we built a React application. That React application, until we added all the stuff we just added, wasn't configured for it to be a full stack application. And that's the reason why it's set up the way it is. So for example, the start script, which is a default script for your application, it says React script start, which is fine when we have a front end React application, right? But because it's a full stack application, the problem is when we deploy this to the internet, it's going to grab the start script and try to use that script to run the application. And React script start will actually not run our application for us the way we want to. So we need to do instead, and I'm gonna go ahead and clear all these drawings, is I need to change the name of this script, right? And change it to React, because now when I want to start the React application, I'll end up saying npm run React. So I will make that change. So I'll change start here to React. Now, I still do need a start script. Remember, I told you it's a default script, but the default thing that I want to do in production is I actually want to start my server, because my server is going to be where I run my application from. So for that, I'm going to tell it to node server.js to use Node.js to run my server. My server will start my whole entire application, but that's only for production. In production, we only need to start one thing, which is start the server. But when we are in development, we're going to need to still run our React application and our backend separately from each other. So this will run the React application in development mode, but I need one to run the server in development mode. So I will go ahead and make another script. I'll just call it dev. You could also call it server if you want also, right? As a matter of fact, I'll call it server. A lot of people do that as well. So I'll call that server. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use nodemon to run the server in development mode. So it'll run my server in development mode, right? And so then in order to run this, I would run npm run server, right? Or even though a lot of people use that, I like dev. I'm going to say dev. So npm run dev. Like what you'll see a lot of people do is they'll call this client and call this server. So npm run client, npm run server, right? To keep it aligned and to keep you from forgetting which one is which, right? Yeah, you know what? Just so you have an example of that, of me doing it like that, I'll call this client, I'll call this server. I probably sound like I keep going back and forth, but the real key is these names don't matter. This is for development mode. The names that do matter that you can't change the name of are the build script and the start script. Those scripts need to be named exactly like that, because almost every single production environment relies on the fact that there's a script to build the application and a script to start the application. And if you don't have those two scripts, or those two scripts do the wrong thing, your application won't work in production, right? So you need a build and a start, a build and a start. And then these are just for us to use in development. So I'll go ahead and stop that. And so now that that is done, we also need to create a proxy. Since we're running two separate applications, by default, those applications can't share data with each other. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell my React application to pretend, for its purposes, that when I run something, right, on localhost :3001, right, that treat that like it's yourself. Treat localhost 3001, right, like it is whatever port React is running on. So this way that you won't have an issue with it treating the two applications like two separate applications. It'll treat it like it's one application, which is going to help us a lot. And because we're not going to have to enable cores in order to send the requests. And we don't want to enable cores if we don't have to, because enabling cores means that other applications can use your data. And so we'll need other security in order to account for that if we add that cores functionality. And core stands for cross-origin resource sharing. So now that that is done, server.js, NodeMon, all that good stuff, all that's been updated. Also want to notate, we're assuming that you already have NodeMon installed. If you don't have NodeMon installed already, then you're going to need to run npm i-g nodemon for this to work. You're going to need to install NodeMon if you don't have NodeMon installed already. Excuse me. So that's the plan now. So what we'll do is I will now save the application, and I'm going to go ahead and open up this application called Postman that if you don't have, you'll need to download it from the Postman website, which I'll share with you in a second. As soon as I remember the I think it's getpostman.com. Let me double check that in a second. Right. Let me come here. I think it's getpostman. .com. Is it getpostman.com? Yep, it is. But it's already got me logged in. That's the thing. So I'd have to sign out here. But if you go to getpostman.com and you don't already have an account, you won't see all this. You'll see a place to download the application to your computer. Remember, you don't want to run Postman in the browser, because when you run Postman in the browser, you can only make API requests to things outside your computer. And we're going to need to make requests on our computer, so you're going to need the application, which I just opened up a second ago, and this is what it looks like here. And once here, and the way you get here is just by making a brand new tab. We're just going to test and make sure that our application works. So we're going to need to, one, turn our application on, and two, verify the application works. So it's very, very normal that you'll probably have a bug or two when you first turn the application on, because you might have spelled something wrong, etc. Happens to the best of us, right? So don't worry about it. But what we need to do is we need to verify the application works. So remember, inside of our package.json, we made this client and server. So we run npm run server to run the backend, right? So npm run server will run the server, right? And let's see. Automatically, you see I have a little error, but that's not an error with our code. Actually, I see what that is, and it's just a step I forgot to tell y'all to do, and I forgot to do myself. Remember I told you about the build script? Remember, inside of server.js, it keeps assuming that we have this build folder. We never made the build folder yet, though. So let's go ahead and run that real quick. npm run build, and that will create the build folder with our production files in it. So we need to make that in order for the server to work. So let's make that npm run build, creating an optimized production build, and done. And now there's a build folder, and there's a favicon in there, and an index.html in here. favicon, index.html, etc. Right? So we shouldn't get that error anymore. So I'm going to go ahead and run npm run server. And when I did that, it says I'm listening on 3001. We in the building, connected to do YouTube at my cluster. So we are up and running. Now your server needs to be running for you to be able to test it on Postman. Keep that in mind. You can't send a request to a server that's not running. So I'm going to test each one of my routes. So to keep in mind what we're testing, I'm going to keep coming back to my routes. And so I'm going to go to the routes. I'm going to go to to-do.js, right? And I have all my routes up here, and we're going to look at them as we go. So I'll start with the first one, which is the API/todos route. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in localhost :3000/todos, right? And it should be API/todos, sorry. And if I run that, I should get an empty array because there's no to-dos created yet, right? So if I go ahead and send the request, I set that to 3000, meant to send that to 3001, send that, and I should get nothing back because there's nothing in there. Now, if I want to create a to-do, right, I want to check that route. I'll go ahead and create a brand new to-do. So let's make a post request. Then I'm going to go to the body. I'm going to check raw and JSON. Then I'm going to add curly braces. And remember, we need a title. And I'm going to say, make money. And I'm going to say completed. And I'll just say false. Right? So now we have make money and we have completed and we have it set to false. So what I will do here is I'm going to send that request, which should create me a new to-do and return it to-do to me. So if I send that request, right? Uh-oh, we seem to be having a problem here because I don't see a response. Interesting. Let's see what that's about. Interesting, I see it here, but I do not see it here. Why is that? Interesting. Why do we have that issue? Let's send another one. And let's see what we get. We have an odd redirection occurring. And why are you redirecting that way? If I was going to take a guess, without me diving any deeper into it, let's add http:// wonder if it's doing HTTPS redirect. And then send, no. We definitely are getting an error, but not a real error. Let me see the post to do's. Okay, so that definitely did change that and make that work. It's like it's tripling up. Why are you doing that? Let's get down to that problem because we can see that the twos are being created. We can see that. They're getting console logged here. This last one looks like it's hanging. And I wonder why that is. Let's see. Let's look at our router.post to do controller.create, to controller.show. Let's look at our controller. Let's go to the create one. Const to do.create, rec.body, const.log to do, res.locals.data.to-do is equal to that to do, and then call next. Right, and then next we would have said res.json. Ah, there we go. Res.locals.data.to-do. Res.locals.data.to-dos. There we go. That's our issue. Our issue was we didn't name that correctly. So I just fixed that in my controllers. And so now we should be fine. This is the reason why we test, because like I said, typos are common. You just need to know what the files in your application do to debug it. So we'll go ahead and we'll say make money false. We'll try to create that again. We'll send it. And if we get the response like we intended to get. So now that is what we intend to see. And now that's what's happening. So now we've created a to-do. And then now what I want to do is I want to get that individual to do. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that ID. So we're going to copy the ID from a to-do we just created. I'm going to change this to a GET request. And I'm going to try to get that to do. I'm going to send it. And now that to do, I was able to get that individual to do. I should be able to get all of the to-dos that are not completed. When I do that, and I get a bunch of make money to-dos, right? So that's working. Then what I want to do is I want to update the to-do. So let's say I go back to, I go to put, I add the ID for an individual to do. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to raw and I'm going to change completed to true. Then I'm going to send that request and see it updated to true. And if I try to get all of the completed to-dos, that should be in the list. So let's get all the completed to-dos. And you see I get back an array of to-dos with the one completed one that we've been working with. That is true. All the other to-dos should be in that one, in this list. Then what I want to do is I want to delete that to-do that we just saw. So I'm going to say delete. I'm going to add the ID. I'm not going to send anybody. And then I'm going to go ahead and send that request. And I should have deleted that to-do. To verify that that to-do was deleted, I'll make a GET request to all the completed to-dos. And that to-do should not be in there. And I get back an empty array. Perfect. Perfect, 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 perfect. So that's what we got. And so we verified that all the functionality works. So our API works. So now what's going to be necessary for us to do is to build the front end. So in order for us to build the front end, all we need is to, again, create that basic functionality where we can click the button and move it to completed and remove, and it gets deleted. And then we can also go ahead and say hello and make it to do. Should all be really, really simple for us. So what I'm going to do is I am going to go back to my VS Code. I'm going to go to my SRC folder. And I am going to actually delete it because it's got a whole bunch of junk in there I don't need. And then I'm going to go to my terminal. And I am going to make sure that my backend is still running. So my backend's running here, right? And I'm going to do my front end stuff over here. And I'm going to stay and just have my whole terminal be here. So this way that I can maneuver stuff around. So when I want to start my front end, I'm going to start it right here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do pwd, make sure I'm in the right spot. Yes, I am. And I'm going to make a directory called src, where all my front end code is going to live. I'm a cd into src. I'm going to make a directory called components. I'm also going to touch a file called index.js, another one called app.js, another one called style.css. So I'm going to add all three of those. So we're going to do that. And then I'm going to cd into components. And I'm going to touch ToDo.js with a capital T and ToDoList.js with a capital T and a capital L. And then cd back to the root. And if I look inside my source folder, I should see index.js, styles.css, app.js, and components. Right? So that's what I should see. Now, what I'm going to do is inside that src folder, I am going to, in my index.js, do the basic setup for it. I'm going to import my style.css file, styles plural. I'm going to import strict mode. From React. My snippet didn't work the way I wanted it to. Right? So we import strict mode from React. Then we're going to go ahead and import React DOM. Actually, let's not even do that. Let's just import just the function we need, which is create root from React /client. And then I'm going to import app from /app. And I realize I'm actually in the wrong file. Thought I clicked on index, but I clicked on app. No big deal. Just move it over here. And then we'll say const root is equal to React DOM. We'll just say create root since we already destructured it. And we'll get document dot get element by ID root. So we'll do that, and then we'll do root dot render. And we will render strict mode with app inside of it. like that, and that's what we'll render. So we'll save that. And then we'll get started with our app.js. And all that code here is just as follows. Import the styles, import strict mode, import create root, import app, create the root, and then render strict mode and app. And then app.js will actually add some code. So first I'm going to import use state, right? And use effects. Import both of those from React. And then I'm going to say I'm going to export default. We're going to do this differently because we're on the front end now. So export default function app like so. And in here, I'm just going to return for right now. Hello world. And I'm going to go ahead and say that I need a list for my to-dos. It can be one of those instances where I want to actually have an array. And then I'm going to say const completed to-dos and then set completed to-dos is also going to be equal to use state. Boom, like that. And then we could go ahead and have const new to do, the one that we might be making at any given point in time. New to do, and then set new to do. And that's going to be an object. And it's going to have a title, which will be an empty string to start off with. And then also a what's it called? A completed property. And that by default is going to be false. And that's all I'm going to do there. And then I'm going to make a, let's say a create, because what we still need to do is we need to go ahead and make our CRUD functionality now on the front end. And to keep it simple, I won't make any extra files right now. I'll just do it all in here. I'll just say that I want to create to-dos, right? I want to delete to-dos. And I want to complete a to-do, or let's say move to completed, right? That's what we need to be able to do right now. So I'll make a create to dos function. Const create to do is going to be equal to an asynchronous function. And we'll say const response is equal to await. And we're going to await for ourselves to fetch. And we're going to be fetching /API/todos, if you remember correctly, right? Then we're going to say const data is going to be equal to, or actually we'll just call this let's say created to do. And we're going to say that's awaiting for response.json. And we'll just do that. And then we'll say, and that'll be the structure. But then there's stuff we need to do in between. Actually, let me finish it. Let me do this, and then we'll come back up to what we need to do in between. Because we got to do a couple things in between these two steps. These are the main steps. We got to get the response, and that response we need to get the JSON out and save it here, and then we need to add that to do to the list. So we need to go ahead and take the to dos that we have, right? And we need to make a let's say updated to dos list, or let's say to dos copy. Let's just call it to dos copy. Remember, we have to make a copy because we can't just update the to-dos list directly. So we'll say to-dos copy is equal to ... to-dos, and throw that created to do in the front, right? And then we'll go ahead and set to-dos to be equal to the to-dos copy that we made, right? So we made that copy so that we can copy everything over, and then put our new to do in here and then drop it there like that. And then when we get an error, we'll just console.error the error, right? And if we want to make an error message, we can make an error message state. Might do that at the end, but that's all we need to do for right now. Now we need to get to what we need to do here between these two steps in order to make this work, which essentially is we can't just fetch the to-dos because we're not making a get request, we're making a post request. So we need a second argument. And that second argument is going to tell it what method we want to use, which is we want to make a post request, right? We also going to tell us what type of data we're going to send. So we're going to send headers. And in those headers, we're going to send our content type like that. And we're going to be sending application JSON. And then we need to also send the body, just like we did inside of Postman. And we're going to send JSON.stringify, right? New to do, like that. And that's going to be the change we need to make. So we're going to send a stringify version of the new to do, right? Then we're going to also we're going to make sure we're sending a post request to API/todos, and we're going to create to do to-dos copy, do all that stuff, and that should generate us creating a new to-do. So that should make the to-do for us. So what I'm going to do now that we understand that, what I'm going to do is down here at the very, very bottom, I am going to go ahead and test to make sure that works. So the way we're going to do that is I am going to make an input. I'm going to make the type. Let's say type. Let's make it text. And then we'll make the value equal to, let's say, let's make equal to this data here. New to do dot title. So I'll make it equal to new to do dot title. And then I'm going to simply say that, let's say, let's do an on change on here too. And on the on change, let's say that what we do on that is we get an event object and let's say that let's just do it like this. Let's just say set new to do, boom, like this, dot dot dot, new to do, comma, and this one is the title is going to be equal to e dot target dot value, like that. Make it simple. So we will bind those values together. And then we also need to say that we also need to say on, let's put these all on separate lines actually. Make this look neater when we're actually done. Put value on its own line, on change on its own line. And I've got another on that I need to do, right? On key down, right? We need to check and see if the key is the enter key, essentially, the enter or return key. And if e dot key, right, triple equals to enter, then we're going to go ahead and do that functionality we made up here called create to do. And we'll say we'll do create to do, which essentially is just going to just run through these steps. Right? And you know we'll also do it here. We'll say new to do. Let's say set new to do. So also make the let's say title, and let's say completed. False. And just to make sure there's no issues with timing, we'll go ahead and say const body is going to be equal to a copy of new to do. Like that. Or a matter of fact, even better. Well, oh, that's good. I like it the way it is. Let's do it that way. Done. And let's save it. And let's finally test out our front end and see if we have the first function working, which is creating to-dos, right? We're still going to need to delete the to-dos and move the to-dos. We're also going to need to get the to-dos also, right, from the list so we can see the list all the time. So we'll deal with that as well. But let's first make sure the first part works, right? So as you can see, we made this input. We have this value. We have on change. We have on key down. And we have this create to do function that we wrote here, right? And then we have these state variables that we made as well. We're not doing anything with these to dos or completed to dos, new to do, really anything, not too much yet. We're just taking this do and seeing that and seeing if seeing if we are currently making it to do correctly. That's what we need to find out. So I'm going to go ahead and run npm run client to start my React application. See if it runs. It says it can't find styles.css. Let's see why not. They cannot resolve styles.css. Let's take a look at index.js. Oh, I see the problem. Got the dot slash on the front. Let me save it. I bet you that fixes it. Yes, it does. Right. And so we got our little input there in the top right. Right. We haven't styled anything. So just that little input field. I'll even zoom in so we can see the input field larger. And then I'm going to open up my developer tools because I need my React dev tools to see if it's working. So I'll go to components, click on app. I should have some empty arrays. And I'm going to go ahead and try to make a to do. So I will just make one called hello, right? And then I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. Something popped up inside here. I see an object here. Does that look like a created to do from my database? Yes, it does. I see hello. I see false. I see the ID. I see created that, updated that version. All that's from the database. So this is working. So we are part of the way done now. So now that we have created that, the next thing that we want to do is we want to actually make it so that we can um, delete a to do, move a to do, and get to dos. I'm gonna do get to dos first. So what I'm gonna do is I am going to make that function first. This way that I can see my list of to dos and actually render them on the page. So I'm going to make a function called get to dos. I'm going to set that equal to an arrow function like that. And I am essentially going to say, I got this try and this catch. This also needs to be an asynchronous function. So I'm going to say here, const response is equal to await for us to fetch. And we're going to fetch API slash to-dos. And then I'm going to say const date. Let's just say to do. Let's say found to-dos is equal to await response.json. Then I'm going to set my to-dos to be the found to-dos. And then if I get an error, I'll console that error, the error, right? And I'm not done yet. So that's how I get just the regular to-dos. And I'm going to say const response to is equal to await fetch slash API slash to-dos slash complete. And I'm going to say const found completed to-dos is equal to await response to.json. And then I'm going to set the completed to-dos equal to those found completed to-dos, right? And so now I have both those lists updated. And then I'm going to start a use effect like that. And then what I'm going to do is I will just say here inside the list, here inside here, then I'm going to call get to dos when the page first loads. And I could make it rerun every single time the completed to dos change, but I don't want to actually do that because I'm already going to be adding the created to do to the list automatically. So I really don't need to rerun it unless I'm refreshing the page, because every time I make the to do, I get that from the database and add that to the list myself. So it would just be kind of like a pointless inquiry to do that. And this is going to be faster than making another API call. So if I just added to do myself when I create it, and the only way I created it is if it came back from the database, I don't need to make another API request just to get that added to do. Right? So that's the way I'm going to keep it. So unless you reload the page, you won't need to rerun get to dos. So that's on purpose. And then what I'm going to do is here, below this input, well, first let me do this. Let me write some text here that says add to do, and then right below that, let's say 5 and H3. Let's say to dos. And then below that, another H3. we'll say completed to-dos, something like that. And then below here, we will say to-dos dot map, and we will map over each individual to do. So let's say for each to do, let's go ahead and return a div with a key equal to the to-do ID. And then for right now, we'll just here just say to do not title. And we'll end up adding the button in here in a little bit. But for right now, so we'll add. And then we'll do the same thing underneath the other H3. But instead of to-dos.map, we'll say completed to-dos.map. Right? So we'll just do that, and we'll have that listed. We'll save it, and we'll take a look. We have a render. We have a couple bad requests. API to do / complete bad requests. Let's see why we're getting a bad request. Let's see. Let's make sure that everything is spelled right. So let's go to probably supposed to say completed, so I just have a typo. That's why it's a bad request. No big deal. So let's go back. You see that I wrote API /do /complete. It's completed. Save. And that should fix our problem. And there we go. Make money, make money, make money. Hello. Right. And then there's no completed to-dos right now. But if I go ahead and say hello again, should have another one there. Perfect. Hi. Yo. What's up? Hey. All that good stuff. So that looks like it's updating like it's supposed to. Cool, perfect. And if I reload, see all these go into the end though. We can fix that real quick. That's a real quick fix. All we need to do let's see, boom, here. We're adding to the front here, and we need to sort this. We want the earliest one at the top. So we'll say boom boom, and we'll take found to dos dot reverse. Boom, and found completed to dos also dot reverse. Right? So we can fix it here on the front end. We could also make a change on the back end and just like sort it if we want to. But either way is fine. To get the effect that we want. It's just that we just have to pick one. And so I can do on the front end, do on the back end, either sort it on the back end or sort it on the front end, one or the other. Right. So we sorted it on the front end. So we just reversed it. And if I go ahead and say hello again, boom, and if I reload, it should be in the same order, and there you go. So we are able to make the to-dos. Now what we want to do is we want to be able to click them and add them to completed. So let's make that happen, right? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a function for move to completed. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to make a function called move to completed. And it's going to be a async function. And essentially all it's going to do is it is going to take in an ID. We're going to do a try catch. And the try catch, essentially what we're going to do is we are just going to take that particular to do and we are going to change it. So in order for us to find it, first we got to find the index. So we got to say const find index, or let's just say index is equal to, let's say to-dos dot find index. And I want to find the the to do. Let's say because essentially what we're going to do, we're going to essentially just go through the list, right? And we are going to find a to do, and we're just going to say that to do's that to do's ID triple equals to the ID that we brought in. And then we're going to say const to do's copy is going to be equal to dot to do's. Because remember what we're looking for, we're going to look for the whatever the ID was that we passed in. We're looking to find the index of to do in the array where that ID is equal to the ID we use. That's how we'll be able to know which one we want. And so the to do that we want to work with, so I'll just say the subject that we want to actually work with is going to be to do's copy bracket the index that we found that it's supposed to be at, right? And then we're going to take that to do, so that subject, and we're going to take its completed property and set it equal to true. Right? And then once we do that, we're just going to go ahead and do a couple things. So the first thing is we're going to say const response is equal to await for us to run fetch over API, over slash API slash to do's slash $ curly braces, the ID. In the second argument, we're going to put the method. And the method we use is going to be a put. Because you're going to be updating it. We're going to say that the headers are going to be application JSON for the content type. And then after we do that, then we'll go ahead and say that the body is going to be equal to JSON.stringify, the subject, and then const response, not response on data, I mean, is equal to response.json, or we should say, let's not call it data, let's call it something better. Let's call it updated to do. And we're gonna wait for that. And then we're going to take completed to-dos, right? And we're gonna copy it. We'll say const completed to-dos. Let's say completed to-dos copy. It's equal to ... completed to-dos. And then after we do that, we'll take completed to-dos. Actually, we'll just set completed to-dos to completed to-dos copy. And then we can't forget to put that updated to do in there. Updated to do in there. And then also that to do's copy, we could splice it out. So we can go ahead and splice the splice to do's copy. Right. So then we'll say let's say const updated. Actually, let's do it this way. After that, let's say const updated to do's is equal to do's. Actually, let's not even do all that. Making extra steps. Let's just do it here. Let's just I'm about to do some extra stuff, but ignore everything I said. If I get time, I'll actually cut all that out. But I'm just gonna go ahead and just take the to-dos copy and just splice it directly. Because we already made a copy, and we're making an extra copy for no reason. I was about to do it. I thought it might be easy to read, but still, even if it might be easy to read, it's a little bit doesn't really make too much sense. So what I want to do is I want to splice out the item at the index that I found, right? I only want to delete one, and only want to delete one item, right? And then I'm going to set to-dos to to-dos copy. So essentially, the index is going to let me know where to find the to-do that I want to update, because all I know here is the ID. I don't know anything else about the to-do. I just know the ID of the to-do. This tells me where to find the to-do inside this list. And I'm going to go ahead and make a copy of it so I can eventually update the state. That's what I'm saving inside the subject, that to do that I found, to do's copy, bracket index. Then I'm gonna take that and set the completed to true. And then I'm going to do the API request. Then I'm going to make a copy of completed to do's and add updated to do there, right? And then I'm going to set completed to do's to be that copy that I made that added in updated to do. Then I'm going to say to do's copy dot slice, and I'm going to take out that, slice out that one item, right? And then I'm going to set to do's equal to the to do's copy that had that item deleted from it. Then if I get an error, I'm going to console.error the error. And then we'll save that. And then we're going to use move to complete it. So what I'm going to do is for every single to do, I'm going to add a button inside of it. Keep that on one line, and I'll just say button. And I'll just write the word complete as the text. And then I will say on click. What we're going to do is going to look a little bit different, but I'm going to go ahead and say, there we go, like that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to call the updated to the move to do function. So I'm going to call move to do, I believe it's called, right? Move to do or move to completed, move to completed. So I'm going to call move to completed, right? And I'm going to call it with the ID of the to do, which is to do dot underscore ID. As a matter of fact, that is turned into a lot of code. So I'm going to put this on multiple lines. So let me go ahead and yeah, right here. Boom. Where's the div end? The div end there. So the curly brace should be there. That should be right. And now let's just put it on multiple lines. And if there is a issue there, I'll see it in a second. Once I can get this on multiple lines, so I can read it better. That's why that goes in there like that. That's what the issue was. And so now we have that, and that one should go here. That one should go there, and that one is fine there also. Right. And we need to return all this. There we go. And then we'll save it. And then we'll take a look real quick at what we have here. Let's try to complete this one. That one completes. Completes. Now the real question is, does it work though? And yes, it does. All of these ones that are completed are now still in the completed when I reload. Remember, it's making an API call every time I do that. And I can check the API calls in the network tab. So if I reload let's look at the completed list. You see I'm getting to-dos in here. I'm getting to-dos with the true for completed there. So all of that seems to be working the way we want it to work. And so now lastly, we just need to delete and then put this stuff in components. So let's come back over here. And let's do this now. Let's come back up. Let's go to deleted. And deleted is even simpler. It's the simplest one out of all of them. And I'll just go ahead and say const delete to-dos, or delete to-do is equal to async. I need to have an ID. I need to do this, right? Try, catch. Need to do a lot of the same thing. Just going to go ahead and copy all that code from move to completed because a lot of it's the same. So actually I just have to do less stuff. Now I still need to find it by the index. I still need to copy to-dos index. I don't need to do this, right? And I also need completed to-dos, right? And I need completed to-dos. And I'll say completed to-dos copy, right? Still need to know we still need an index. We need a delete request. Instead, we don't need to send the body. And then we get a deleted to-do back. Well, actually, to be honest, we don't even need a deleted to-do, so we can technically get rid of all that about the deleted to-do. And then we do need this. We do need to set completed to-dos. Essentially, we only need to do this part here at the bottom. And what we need to do is here, we need to go ahead and do that splice on completed to-dos copy dot splice and set completed to-dos to completed to-dos copy, right? Because essentially what we're doing is we're saying that, hey, I need to find which to-do it is, right? I need to make a copy of completed to-dos. I need to delete it. I need to splice it out of the index. I need to splice it from the index and like remove that item, then update the completed to-dos with that new spliced array, and then I'll console.error the error if I am not successful. And there we go. Voila, that's done now. So that's the delete to do function, right? And also I'm gonna await response.json. I just don't need to save it anywhere. Like I'll await it, but I'm not gonna save it anywhere because I don't need it. So there goes that. Then we'll come back down here to the to where I'm dealing with all the completed to-dos, etc. And I'm just going to copy exactly what I did here above and just change the function that I call. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to drop that here. Instead of to-dos.map, I'll do completed. to-dos.map, right? And then after I do that piece, I'll do to-do dot underscore ID, to-do dot title, same thing. Then I have the button on click, but I'm not going to call move to completed. I'm going to call delete to do instead of complete. I'm going to write delete and save. And let's come back over here. Let's complete something. Let's delete it and it's gone. Let's reload it. Make sure it didn't come back and it's gone. Right? So we now can do the whole shebang. Create, read, update, destroy. The to-do functionality is done. And this is where we're going to end this video, right? All this code is going to be shared. So you will be able to go ahead and look through it whenever you need. But now we have all the functionality. So what's going to come in the next video is now we're going to make use of those components, right? The to-do component and the to-do list component, right? So right now we just have all the data just thrown directly here inside of the JSX, which is a little bit messy. And we're going to use the components to take this working functionality and put it into components so it works better. So we're going to do that. And then we're also in the third video, we're going to then style it so that it looks professional. And we're going to use some CSS modules in order to do that. So that's what we'll do in the next video. So thanks a lot. Take care, and we'll see you all soon.